Welcome to my channel, All Sides of the System. The story I'm going to tell today is about a handgun that my father owned up until the time I was at least in third grade. I never thought I'd see that handgun again. I haven't thought about it for years. But recently, when this story came up with family members, they told me that they might know where it is. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to actually take a look for it. But I think the story's worth telling anyway, so I'm going to do that. And then we'll see if we can find the gun. The night in question was Christmas Eve, and I had been sitting at my desk all afternoon. I let the secretaries and paralegals and other lawyers go early because it was Christmas Eve. And in between clients, I was snorting lines of crushed Oxycontin, trying to forget that tomorrow would be my first Christmas without Michelle. I usually would snort up 2 lines at a time. I was getting pretty blasted at this point, and the last 2 clients I had, I knew would pay cash. That's why I scheduled them for late in the day. I had put off Christmas shopping all season long. That was Michelle's department, and I dreaded doing it. It just brought back too many memories. But I figured this was as good a time as any. In fact, this was the only time I had left, and now I have the cash to do it. So I finished up the last line that I was going to do and put the mirror in my top drawer, stepped over to the window and looked out from the 2nd floor down onto Merrimack Street. Out from the Bank of America across the street came several patrons, and I noticed one of them was the client I was waiting for. He made his way over a mound of snow and then slipped on a patch of ice and went down to one hand and caught his balance. When he stood back up, he looked up and saw me in the window and gave me a wave. He was an alcoholic, and he was clearly drunk. The case that he had was a hair away from being a motor vehicle homicide, where he hit a young couple head on and nearly killed them, sent them to intensive care. It was just a nightmare, and the case was coming up for trial. So we'd been putting that off, procrastinating on that too, but it was getting close now. So finally, when he made his way across the street, I met him at the front door of my office and ushered him in. We came down, and I took a seat on my side of the desk, and he took a seat on the opposite side, and then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a bank envelope marked $7,500. He handed it to me, and I flipped through the contents, never doubting for a second that every dollar was there. There was only one set of balls in that room, and I knew they sat between my legs. Next, we did a little small talk where he remarked how beautiful my kids were looking at their picture on the wall, and how sorry he was that Michelle had passed away of a brain aneurysm on Father's Day, nonetheless, that prior year. He then looked over his shoulder and he remarked about the office. Wow, everything came out really good. And at first, I was wondering what the hell he was talking about. And then I remembered that the last time he was there, Michelle was in the middle of decorating. And I said, yeah, it did come out pretty good. And as he turned squarely in his seat to face me, his gaze lingered for a second on the bar. And my first thought was to offer him a drink. And then I said, what the fuck are you doing? The last thing this guy needs is a drink now or ever, for that matter. So I blew that idea off, and we went over his case and when we were going to have witnesses come in to prepare. And then we wrapped things up after about an hour or so. And as he was preparing to leave, he looked over at the bar again. This time, I didn't take more than a second to dismiss any thoughts of giving him a drink. In fact, I wanted to get him out of there so I could blast a couple more lines before my final client of the day came. After I ushered that client out, I went back to my desk and quickly opened the drawer, got out the mirror, another 80 milligram Oxycontin, and a tea bag strainer. It had in the middle of it was a screen. And after I licked the coating off the time-release pill, I would rub it back and forth with my thumb over the screen, and that was my preferred method of pulverization. Once it was in a fine powder, I'd stretch it into 2 lines and blast one up each nostril. Then I'd settle back in my thick leather chair, put my head back, and wait for the drip to go down the back of my throat and the drug to take hold. As I was doing that, I was thinking the next client should be here any second, right when there was a knock at the door. And this was a little bit surprising because the next client was this Greek kid who had a big fat Greek father who was a loudmouth. And when I heard the knock, I was wondering why, because they knew that after hours I had an open door policy. Nobody knocked. He could just walk right in. So I thought for a second, maybe I inadvertently locked the door when the last client left. So I picked up the pace and got back out to the foyer, and lo and behold, the door was in fact unlocked. So I opened it, and on the other side was a guy who I had never seen before. He looked familiar, but I can't say I ever saw him before. And he extended his hand and introduced himself as John Sullivan. He said he had a drunk driving case he wanted me to represent him on. I looked him over as I waved him into the office and shut the door. He was wearing a long trench coat, like ripped Converse sneakers, ripped denim blue jeans. He had like a ruddy complexion, reddish hair, and a mishmash of crooked teeth. The whole look of him made me think that in the last 24 hours, he had either been doing heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, or quite possibly all of the above. My first inclination was to push him back out the door and slam it in his face. But then I happened to notice in his left hand a red, white, and blue bank envelope from Bank of America. I said, Mr. Sullivan, if your case is in district court, it's going to be at least a $2,500 retainer. And he said, I got $3,000, will that get us started? I matched his sinister grin and waved him on up to my front office. When I got there, just like with the last client, I took a seat on my side of the desk. And John Sullivan, before he took a seat, he reached into his jacket, and I noticed for a second they didn't have the bank envelope anymore. And out of his breast pocket, in one swift motion, he pulled out a gun and put it right to the bridge of my nose and started screaming, "Give me the fucking money, every penny of it right now. I'm gonna blow your fucking head off." I must have looked like an idiot with my hands shaking, raised, denying I knew what the hell he was talking about. He kept screaming, "Give me the fucking money now or I'm gonna blow your head off." His spit flung off his dry, cracked lips. And I just kept thinking to myself, how the fuck did he know they have any money here? And it's like he read my mind. He goes, I was just at Bank of America and the guy in front of me withdrew $7,500 in cash. I followed him and he came right here. I waited him to leave and then I came in. So I think that money's here. I think you have it. And he's yelling the whole time, screaming in fact, and demanding I give him the money. Now, just about that time, the Oxycontin that I had snorted before he got there was merging in my bloodstream with a mix of adrenaline, creating like a speedball effect that would have made John Belushi envious. I was lifted, like my spirit was lifted. I was high as a fucking kite. And the funniest thing of all is rather than fear for my life, from the gun, the barrel is only this long, shaking right at the bridge of my nose. All I could think about was the fact that the gun looked identical, not similar, identical to the .38 caliber Smith & Wesson Chief Special that my father kept in his top drawer of his bureau in his bedroom the whole time I was growing up. He kept screaming and I was musing on the gun, wasn't listening to a word that he said, but I could tell my hands were still up and shaking, and I still must have looked absolutely like a jerk off. I remember that gun well. As soon as my babysitter would put me down for a nap, I would sneak out of my room into my parents' room and drag my mother's desk chair across the room, across the hall, into my father's bedroom, and then stand on it so I could reach the top drawer. In that drawer, there was a blue box that marked Smith & Wesson. And my father obviously didn't believe in trigger guards or safes. He left the gun in the open box, and his only safety measure was keeping it unloaded. So there was spilled bullets all inside the box. I remember taking that gun and putting the chair back where I found it, sneaking into my room. And there I would play with it. let my imagination run wild. I would take hostages from stagecoach robberies in the Wild West to armored car robberies in Charlestown to bank heists to jewelry store robberies, anything I could think of. By the end of second grade, I was sneaking the gun to school. First, I remember, a single bullet wrapped in a napkin that I kept in my sock. I had planned on taking it out and showing other kids, but I chickened out. The next thing I knew, I was brave enough to bring the whole gun to school, and I kept it in my book bag. Again, too scared to show it to anybody. But long before Columbine, I had the gun in school, I had the gun after school, and while the other kids in the neighborhood played with their impotent handguns, the plastic toys, I marveled at the cold steel in my hand that I had the real thing. When I was alone in my room, I would play with it, spin the barrel, cock it into place. I never carried around the neighborhood loaded, but sometimes in the privacy of my room, I would snap that cylinder shut and you could feel the difference in the weight from when the bullets were in it and when they weren't in it. And when I was positive that it was empty, I would pull back the hammer and click, let it dry fire. I marveled at the way it fell in my hand. And you might think that this sounds ridiculous, but it actually taught me responsibility, because I got that gun back in that top drawer each and every time, never coming close to getting caught, never scratching the gun or putting anything out of place to give my father reason to interrogate me on the fact that I had been in there at all. At that point, John upped the decibels of his screaming a couple of notches and brought me crashing back to reality. Give me the fucking money now. I'm not waiting another second. And again, there's just spit flying off his chapped lips. I'm shaking my head, shaking my hands. And what was making me nervous is that the gun, the barrel was only this long, was shaking right at the bridge of my nose. And he had now moved his finger on the trigger. This guy was so volatile, he could have easily pulled that trigger by accident and just smoked me, lit up my face. That would have been the end of it. Just as I was trying again to explain to him, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any money here. A thought occurred to me. I said, listen, brother, I don't have $7,500 like somehow you think I do, but maybe I can make this worth your while. Why don't I pay you for the gun and buy it from you? This guy, John Sullivan, or whatever his fucking name was, looked at me like I had 3 heads. It was almost comical. He's like, what the fuck did you say? I'm gonna kill you, bro. Give me that fucking money. And just then, the next client opened the door and walked in the office. Now, from where we were, John Sullivan almost had to jump on top of my desk and on top of me to get out of the doorway so that the Greek father wouldn't see him. And he's screaming, Tamagini, you better be validating parking tickets, because my wife couldn't find a place to park and she had to go put it in the garage. I was just relieved that the son of a bitches were finally here. And I knew that they had $25,000 in cash for me as a retainer on their son's case. This kid had been dealing weed with the Asians, Cambodians to be more specific, the teeny rascal gang, which are a lot more formidable than their name indicates. So it was a pretty big case, and it was a good retainer. John Sullivan literally was on top of my desk at this point. And I saw the gun in his hand out of the corner of my eye, and I went to grab his wrist, but he spun off me and got out the door before I could get a hold of him. I made chase after him, but he went flying by the Greek father and son, got past me out the door, and he was gone. The father looked like a fat Fred Flintstone, shaking his head like this, like what was that all about? And then he bent down and he picked up a red, white, and blue envelope off the floor, and he said, this lunatic just dropped this. I opened it up, and naturally it was completely empty. And I tried to compose myself so I wouldn't chase these clients off, and I ushered them up to the front office. They got up there, and immediately I tried to move off topic of what happened with that guy. And the whole time, that's all I could think about. And we turned our attention to the Greek kid's case. And we went over that. He had a motion to suppress that was going to be on first. And we prepared for that for about an hour or so, and then set up another appointment. And he wished me a Merry Christmas after he had handed me the envelope. Again, I didn't count, but I was pretty sure it was all there. And they made their way off into the night. I quickly locked the door this time and gathered my things, thinking surely I'm going to find this John Sullivan, or he's going to find me, on my way to my car and confront me again with this gun. But I didn't see him. I didn't see him that night. I didn't see him the next day. I didn't see him ever again. And it was a little bit surprising because he knew where I was. I was easy to find. I had no idea where he was. But I did think about him quite often at first. I was thinking about how that afternoon would have turned out if I wasn't so high, convincing myself that the reason that things turned out as they did is because I was. That being high, gave me the confidence to deal with it, and maybe keeping my mind off what he was saying and thinking about my father's gun got me through that moment. But then who was I kidding? How is being doped up like a fucking elf gonna make me a better hostage or victim, a robbery victim, whatever you want to call it? That would just be ridiculous. But it's all I could think about. And that started to creep into other aspects of my life, where I thought that being high would save me, made me more comfortable, gave me less anxiety. Now looking back, I know that that was all bullshit. But at the time, it made sense, and it also justified all the pain meds that they had been giving me that I'd been taking after my car accident. I was just thinking, though, that when I told you I never saw John Sullivan again, that wasn't exactly true. In fact, for a long time before I got sober, I would see him every day. Every day when I looked in the mirror, I'd see John Sullivan staring back at me, high out of his mind on the same drug that I was on, greed. I hope you enjoyed that story. If you did, hit the like button, write me some comments, let me know if you liked what I had to say today and what other types of stories you'd like to hear, because every day was a new story. Now, I'm in the house where I grew up, and I'm going to take you right now, and I really haven't looked ahead of time because I doubt it's going to be here after all these years. My father must have moved it somewhere, or, I know he bought other guns. I don't know what he did with that one, but let's take a look. Back in the day, I come in here and I take this chair, and I was just a little kid at the time, so I had to drag it all the way into this room. And I was probably like yay high at the time. And this is the bureau. So I have to stand up there being perfectly quiet so the babysitter wouldn't hear me. And I'd pull this drawer open, and usually it was right here. I don't see it on first glance. You see there's some of my mother's shit in here now. But both my mother and father passed away. My father passed away in September. And I don't know where he's moved things. Oh, here we go. That's exactly how it would be every day. Can you see that? Look how old the shit's gotten. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 bullets there. Thing is completely empty. And there you have it. That's it. The Saturday night special. 38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver. Look how small that barrel is. That motherfucker kept that right at my nose. And he pulled back the trigger. And he had his finger, pulled back the hammer, I should say. And he had his finger right on that friggin' trigger. All he had to do was like that. It would have blown my fucking head off. Smoked the shit out of me. But it didn't happen. And I lived for another day and to tell the story. So, have a good afternoon. Be safe. We'll talk to you next time.